everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Janine Wolf, and today I'm joined by Monica Helvey. Monica is a licensed marriage and family therapist in California and Texas and a trauma-informed burnout recovery expert. She helps high-achieving career women overcome chronic stress and find work-life balance. One of the reasons I wanted to have Monica on is because she's also participating in TheraBundle. You all know I love TheraBundle. So she's going to be sharing about her contribution to the bundle and things that she's learned in her practice that she's sharing not only on the podcast today, but also with what TheraBundle offering. So today we're going to talk about 3 insights every therapist needs to create a burnout-free private practice. Welcome, Monica.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you about this today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. And I stand on my head for TheraBundle because I believe it's such a good thing. I've been with it with Samara since the beginning. And so I think it's really very useful. So if you're listening, be sure and check it out.
Yeah, for therapists getting started. Therapists who are getting started especially, there's just so much value in there. So
Yeah. Okay. All right. So your story, we're going to start there. It involves your story with professional burnout, which probably impacted every area of your life. But why don't we start there? Can you tell me a little bit about what got you to the place where you wanted to provide this sort of information to other therapists?
Yeah, absolutely. So like many other therapists, I would say that my experience with burnout, there was probably different iterations of burnout where, probably younger in, even college, I was probably experiencing some version of burnout there, but I didn't recognize. So I come into grad school, I immediately get into my career and I dive headfirst into community mental health, right? Like so many others. I spent 9 years in community mental health and sort of worked my way up into a leadership, supervisory role. And like so many other therapists that I talked to and have worked with, I didn't even recognize at that point how overwhelmed, frustrated, exhausted, just all the signs of burnout were there. But there were so many that were experiencing the same thing that it was sort of like, welcome to the club.
And you're too darn take the time to notice it, right?
Right. And so it was like, hey, we're just all in this together. There was this very much like it was normalized. So I didn't recognize it as necessarily something that was requiring any extra attention or that I needed to be intentional about healing. So, it really came to a head in, I would say, about 2017 when my marriage was experiencing a crisis. My husband was basically like, you're working all these crazy hours and starting a private practice on the side, and we have 3 young kids. What are you doing? Why are you doing this?
Right.
And again, like so many other therapists, I was doing more and more and more and not really assessing what needed to come off my plate. And so when he kind of called me out on that, lovingly, maybe, hopefully, I recognized like, yeah, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm working a full-time career in community mental health and then working on the side in a private practice. And I have 3 kids under 5 years old. Like what is driving this was really kind of the underlying question that I started getting into. And as I was like in that space of questioning, what are my motives here? Why do I need to keep taking on more to feel like lovable or valuable in my marriage? Like, what is this really about? Is when I started to understand like, oh, there's some like root wounds and core beliefs that are really driving a lot of my burnout patterns. And so as I started healing that, I recognized I'm not alone. There's a lot of therapists that run into this as well. And unfortunately, I hadn't done enough of that work when I was starting my private practice. And so while I was beginning to question these things and beginning to become aware of like, oh yeah, I am burning myself out. I am lighting the candle from both ends. I still wasn't necessarily interrupting those patterns. And so I left community mental health to start a private practice, but I hadn't, again, really pulled back the layers of the onion. And so I basically recreated a lot of the things that were burning me out in community mental health. I recreated that in my private practice and became my own worst boss. So
knowing you better, we think, and we're sort of trained in grad school that it's going to be really hard and you're not going to make a lot of money. And so we sort of expect that that's what it's going to be, that that's what it should be.
And you have to be accessible and work nights and weekends if that's when your clients are available and that's what they want to do. And so much of what I was starting my private practice on was what I believed other people were doing and what I should be doing, like the right way to start a private practice. And I really wasn't even considering like what I needed to make a living, what I wanted in terms of like the kind of work schedule I wanted. I wasn't asking any of these heart-centered, like really building my business from a long-term sustainable success framework at all. And so inevitably I ended up burning out again in my private practice. So it was like one of these experiences where it was like, oh, you bring yourself everywhere you go. And here I go again, right?
I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, my boss is such an asshole. She always thinks she needs to work later into the day, into the evening, on the weekends, and never give me a break.
Exactly. And I'm like, I started realizing like I didn't want to go to work on Monday. And I'm like the asshole boss who like expects me to be there. And I'm like, wait a minute, I own this thing. Like, what am I doing here? So that really, again, accelerated it again, where I was back in the work, really trying to understand what am I doing? Why am I running on autopilot? Reflexively looking outwards to decide what I'm doing with my life instead of coming inwards to really make those decisions for myself.
Okay. So the first sign that something wasn't right was your husband. And I think that's probably typical for a lot of us because we're so busy doing the things that we don't really even have time to slow down and figure out like, this is what's happening. I mean, when I was with a group practice, I was seeing 38 clients a week, and I front loaded my week. So I saw the most on Monday, and I'd come home and literally like just say, I had 3 kids too. I was like, I'll be in my room in the dark if anyone really needs me. And I like, that still wasn't enough to wake me up and say, what is going on here? This is not the way I want to live my life.
I know. It's like the analogy I give is it's like I used to work in restaurants, like when I was going through like grad school and stuff like that. And it's like when you have become so accustomed to the heat of the plates, you don't even recognize you're setting it down on the table. You're like, here, this plate's hot, don't touch it. And you're touching it, right? And they're like, what? And that's like how it was for me with my own burnout. It was like I was so tolerant and accustomed to being in chronic fight or flight, just low bandwidth, low margin for my own self and my own needs, that I just become tolerant of it, used to it, desensitized to it. And so it really took someone from the outside telling me like, hey, you're doing too much for me to even go, oh yeah, I am doing a lot, aren't I? Yeah. And so that seems to be the case with a lot of the folks that I work with, is that they tend to be like high achieving and highly, driven and just really like audacious dreamers, like really big dreams for themselves and really big plans for themselves. And sometimes if we're not really deeply aligned with what is driving that or our value behind those big dreams, we can get sucked into the dopamine hits of like checking things off the list and accomplishing things that we miss out on, again, really tending to ourselves in the process.
Is there a way to define burnout so that people can really take a look at, okay, am I checking all the boxes? Maybe I'm not seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, yeah, it's the definition of burnout. We'll start there. I have a lot of ideas. Okay. So stress unsuccessfully managed. That's my short definition of that. So it could be mental, emotional, physical stress unsuccessfully managed. So when we're trying to metabolize our stress, when we're not able to get completion from that and come back to a full baseline, then it builds. It starts to sort of compound on itself. And that load between where our baseline was and everything that we're now holding becomes the new mental load. And that's what's creating the burnout, is we're never coming back down to baseline with that stress. And that eventually burns us out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, how many times have I had this conversation with clients about stress levels and managing anxiety? And if you're not doing things like mindfulness and somatic techniques to bring your general, your heightened stress level down, then you start at a higher point the next day, and it's just going to keep going.
Yeah.
I know as therapists that we don't do the things we tell our clients because we're too busy taking care of them.
Exactly. Again, our focus becomes externalized, right? Like we're really the caregivers. We're helping and we're looking outwards at, are they okay? Do they have what they need? Are their needs met from our therapeutic work? That sometimes we don't ever come back in and say, are my needs met during his therapeutic exchange? Like, is this feeling rewarding and fulfilling for me? Is this my ideal client? Are these hours working for my needs? Oftentimes we're like, oh, what works best for you? Like, what time are you available? And, that's fine to an extent. But over time, if there's becoming a mental load or some stress that is coming at a cost to you with that, and you're not taking notice of that, then that burden is what's going to lead to potential resentment, but certainly burnout.
And I'm glad you said that word. Resentment is so big. I talk about that a lot, the therapists in my consultation groups and in the trainings I do, that so many times we set ourselves up for resentment, whether we're offering someone a really reduced fee spot or we're taking on a client that we don't have the capacity for, all of those things, the resentment builds. And then hopefully as you progress in your career, you're like, okay, well, I made that choice, so I can't be resentful of them. But what I can do is learn from it and make a better choice next time.
And take notice of that, right? Sometimes we can feel ashamed that we're feeling resentful towards our clients. And so rather than square up with that, we want to suppress it and not look at it, which is so human of us. Like, we don't want to pay attention to things that make us uncomfortable. But also, the resentment is an indicator that something is misaligned. Again, taking radical responsibility and ownership of what that means for us might mean making a hard decision, like saying, oh, I think I have a boundary I need to advocate for. Like, I think we're at the edge of what I'm comfortable with, this exchange of low reduced fee now. Like, I think we're there. It might be time for you to step up, or maybe I need to refer you out, right? Like, that resentment is feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we've got someone to the point where they're starting to have this little inkling, and okay, maybe I'm checking too many boxes. Maybe this is burnout that's beyond what I've always thought was normal. What do I do next?
Yeah. So such a great question. For a lot of the folks that I tend to work with, they are in that place where they have the self-awareness. They maybe have listened to the podcasts or done the workbooks or tried the yoga classes. They're trying to do the self-care to manage their burnout. But what I really want to propose is, as therapists, that we start getting to a place where we're working to prevent our burnout, not just treat our burnout, because there is a difference between treating it and healing it, preventing it from happening, right? And so I think treatment of burnout is essential. We've got to notice it and respond to it. And those are oftentimes when we already have symptoms. There's already something happening. There's a simmer, there's smoke, we notice that there's things going on. But what I want to suggest, and really what I suggest in my therapeutic offer, is that there are some ways to actually do some really deep healing around the patterns that are driving you to burnout. And so while, again, I'm all for self-care and doing things to treat your burnout, what I really want folks to understand is that you can heal this. And there's some really practical things that you can begin to do. And so what I propose is you have to identify and overcome some of the limiting beliefs that might be driving you to burnout. As an example, I really became aware of my limiting belief and struggles with perfectionism and the ways that was showing up in my business, right? Really rigid boundaries, really rigid, high expectations of myself, and wanting to get it right according to who, I don't know, but the right way to start my practice, the right hours, the right accessibility, the right insurance panels, all the things. And so by having these beliefs of I want to do this right, it was really putting a lot of stress and tension and pressure on me to perform in a way that wasn't always aligned with my true needs, wants, or desires. And so by becoming aware of that belief pattern, I was able to say, what is this rooted in? What is this about? Why? Who's this imaginary person that I'm going to get it wrong and get in trouble with? Who is this for? Again, who is this really? And by healing that, then I could start to notice myself being less preoccupied and vigilant around getting it right. And I was a little bit more this right here, center, my heart center, this is right for me. And not that I lose sight of the laws and the ethics, but really just being able to, again, sense Are these the right hours and operations for me? Is this the right ideal client for me? Is this insurance arrangement right for me? Right? As opposed to what everybody said I should be doing. Does that make sense?
I mean, I preach that stuff all the time because it's so important. And we just start a private practice and we try to get on all the panels and we take the clients whenever they want to be seen. And we do all of these things and we set our rate lower than we could support ourselves on, and all of those things. And we think that we're supposed to be doing that because it seems like everyone else is doing that. And a lot of the social media therapist spaces, people are shamed if they suggest that maybe they need to change that. So our profession does not really encourage us to do those things that we really need to.
I know. And I have so much empathy for those folks who are so reactive of anyone
Yes.
doing what meets their needs, right? Like if we're having a reaction to that, we know that that's probably about something else. And so I have a lot of empathy for someone who says, how dare you do that for you when I don't have the permission to do that for me? And I just want them to, again, get the message and get the resources so that they can understand, like, this is for you too. You can come with us. Like, come, we want you.
Yeah.
So that's certainly one of the ways that I support folks with understanding, like, burnout is something that you can heal from. And this is one of the things that you can begin to do to not just treat it, but heal it so that you don't have to keep running into the cycle of burnout. Another suggestion that I have that is an important piece of healing and preventing burnout is just learning some really tactical skills for regulating your nervous system. Because when we're operating out of dysregulation and fight or flight, we're not accessing our full, wise, logical, resourceful self. And our decisions, our thoughts, our beliefs about ourselves and the work that we're doing is sometimes skewed towards the negative and unfavorable. And so one of the most basic things we can be doing as therapists is learning how to really master and regulate our nervous system to tolerate private practice and even the career of therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've learned so much more. At least when I was in grad school in the 90s, we've learned so much more about the brain and the nervous system and all of that. And so it's a matter of, like we said earlier, like tending to yourself, taking a look at yourself. And maybe you feel guilty that you don't take on that client who desperately wants to work with you. But we also lose sight of the fact that if I take on that client who's outside of my capacity, not only is that impacting me, but because it's impacting me, it's going to impact my entire caseload because no one's going to be getting the best of me. And that's the way I've sort of justified with clinicians at times saying, like, well, if you can't do it for yourself, can you do it for all the rest of your clients?
Isn't it wild? Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes that's really a helpful perspective shift because when we recognize, again, this is bigger than just taking care of you, right? This is like your clinical work. This is when your clinical capacity is diminished and you're showing up less spacious for the person you're working with, they may energetically feel some of that, not get as good outcomes in those sessions, and there's all this stuff that can come from that, right? They're like, oh, I'm not feeling that we're making enough progress, right? They start wanting to space out sessions, start no-showing, who knows, right? Like all of these ripples of us as clinicians not taking care of ourselves and resourcing ourselves appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And most of us don't even consider ourselves business owners when we open a private practice. We're just therapists that are doing the work. And so much goes into those decisions about what hours are you going to work? How long between clients do you need to take to, be okay for yourself? What are the ideal clients that you do your best work with and they don't stress you out every time you see them on your calendar, all of those things. And it's so hard to do that for ourselves. And I'm going to give a little plug here to peer consultation because all about that this is one of the biggest benefits that I see for members in my groups is that they come to their group and say, I'm feeling like I need to make this decision. And I feel so guilty. And their colleagues will just jump in and say, you have to be okay. I'm worried about you. The last few groups you've come to, you've had these really difficult cases. Like, yeah, I agree. You have to make some choices. Let's help you navigate that,
Absolutely. A high level community that also values alignment and values like sustainable success is going to be the absolute right community to get feedback from and to grow with and to lean into for support. Like community support is such a huge part of resourcing yourself so that you can handle the
Mhm.
work that you're doing. I absolutely agree with that. And I will say again, a high level aligned community is all the difference because if you have consultation or a group where there's a lot of scarcity or a lot of, again, willing to tolerate misalignments, and they might just sort of give you the messaging of like, suck it up, you can do it, we're all there with you, right? Like, and that might not necessarily be. I remember being in supervision as an associate and trying to share in the group supervision that I was feeling some burnout. And my supervisor at the time said, already? And I went, you will never hear me say that again. You will never hear me complain again because as like my high achieving self, I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm not supposed to yet. Like, okay. So I took it out of my vocabulary and like shoved it in the basement, right? And was like, cool, you're never going to hear that. I'll never ask for that need ever again.
Yeah. I actually had a supervisor that was so annoyed that I kind of, well, I'd been on the job for a while, but I was transitioning from being under supervision to working for her as just my like admin supervisor.
Yeah.
And she was so annoyed that I'd gotten pregnant. And she was like, you're going to have morning sickness. You're going to miss work. It's going to impact you. And I went home and I told my husband, I was like, I will never have morning sickness. And, I don't know if I was lucky or if I willed it to happen. I never had morning sickness. I was like, I am not going to let her be right about that.
Yeah. Exactly, right? It's like the things we don't sometimes recognize, especially again when you're in a supervisory role. You have a lot of power energetically in the room there, especially on young therapists who not only need to be supported, but need to know that what they're experiencing is like safe and okay, and like it's okay to be vulnerable about these tough things. And yeah, it's having a therapist supervisor who's thriving and not burnt out themselves again is going to be again the quality support you want to seek out if you're needing some support in from community for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen some conversations in some of the Facebook groups recently by group owners who say things like, my clinicians aren't allowed to see more than 25 clients a week. And they have these parameters set up so that they don't burn them out, so that they want to keep working there and they want to be successful and support the practice. And I love that. That's such an important shift for us because outside of our field, people are like, what do you mean you don't see 40 clients a week? Rhino, they just don't understand that. They don't understand the emotional toll. They don't understand the paperwork and the admin and everything else that goes into it.
Right, absolutely. And again, I think the more that we can start in encouraging and empowering people to really sense into like what environment do you need to be able to thrive and not experience burnout. Like some folks might motor really high and they're like, I want 3 back to back and then I want 3 hours off. Right. Or, I want, 1 and then I need an hour and then I need another one, and then I need another hour. Right. Like everybody's runs differently. And so I think when we can start to create spaces where therapists can really start to sense into what is working and what feels right for them and their nervous system, then that's going to be really what keeps folks able to sustain the work that we're doing for longer and longer periods of time.
That makes a lot of sense. So something that you've mentioned a couple of times and something that I find so important is making sure that your practice aligns with your values. So I have my own thoughts on that, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to hit a target if you don't know where or what the target is. So I just love that Tamara is doing the mission, vision, values, the workshop for TheraSummit this year, because I'm like, yes, finally. And we're talking about centering our work around our personal values. And that's definitely not a conversation we're having in grad school. We're not learning what our values are, how to sense them, how to know them. I think we may have a better sense of them than we think we do as therapists. We're pretty self-aware, but we may not really come to differentiate or understand needs versus values, and that our needs are our needs. And yes, our needs can change, but so can our values. Like the things that we value, the things that I valued 10 years ago for myself or for my family, they might alter differently, right? Like at different stages in my life or in my journey, like I might have to shift a little bit to energetically spend more time. Like when my children were very young, like that the value for family is always the value for family. But I might have to use more energy, time, or resources to support that value being met than I might a little bit later when they're in college or they're out of the house or something like that. Does that make sense? So being clear on what your values are is really important to identify up front, but also understanding to hold it flexibly and and to give yourself like the permission slip to set and hold boundaries to support and protect your values, and also to notice like, okay, well, this may be a time where I can sort of let this one soften a little bit because it doesn't need as much protection now, or something
Right.
else.
Right. Yeah. The biggest, I think the most solid example of values in private practice comes up over and over and over. And that is around late cancellation and no-show fee. And, and I support people doing whatever works for them in their private practice. But there's really strong opinions out there on that topic. But what I see over and over is that, okay, so this therapist adopted this policy because that's what people told her she needed to do. And now she's racked with guilt every other day because she's implementing a policy that doesn't really match with her values, And so that values perspective is so important. And the flexibility too. I love that piece. And that's how I do it. I use flexibility, and, we have clinical judgment and experience and training and all those things so that we can make the best choice for ourselves and our clients. But once I started really tuning into my values, that it made decision-making so much easier in private practice.
Absolutely. Especially again, if you consider your private practice as a business, because there's going to be a lot of business decisions that might butt up against your belief systems again, right? Like, oh, I have a belief that I'm a capitalistic asshole if I charge, a rate that I have to charge in order to pay for my kids' daycare, right? Like, we really have to, sometimes our value and our needs and our beliefs will really edge up on each other. And that's where, to kind of circle back, like that awareness of what limiting beliefs you might have that block you or create resistance for you to stand up for your values, or to hold your needs and values with importance, right? So that can sometimes be the growth edge there for us as business owners, is like, oh crud, I have to actually set a boundary here because I do know that I value this thing, but it's really rubbing up against some beliefs that I have about myself, or systems, or beyond that.
Money stories.
Money stories, always money.
You can complicate things so much and write it back.
So much. Yeah.
Yeah. And we also don't, a lot of times when people are starting their own private practice, they are not even thinking about, like, I need to put money aside for retirement. I might now have to pay for my own out-of-pocket health insurance. If I want to take a vacation, that's a double whammy in private practice because you're not making money and you're spending money. So maybe I need to make enough money to put aside a fund to pay myself during those times, or sick leave and like that. And it's so complicated because we all grow up with money beliefs based on our experience with our family of origin, and then really looking at how that's impacting us today. And like you said, just sort of challenging those limited beliefs. And is this serving me in some way, or is this just making me more likely to burn out because I'm struggling to pay my bills all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've known so many colleagues who have struggled with the money stories and the values, right? Like they have needs and they have values around paying for a service. They pay for their own services, with practitioners and providers. And yet when it comes time to collect, it's like, oh no, I have to ask for the payment now. And oh, this person's struggling and maybe I won't make them pay the full rate and all these things. And it's like, you're struggling. We're all struggling. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what about you? Again, keep holding yourself with as much reverence as you hold your clients, right? And really that's modeling to them. We can't tell them like, oh, advocate for yourself and you're worthy and you're valuable. Oh, but not me. right? Like modeling to them
Yeah.
the dynamic that we really want to be modeling oftentimes. And so, again, this is where knowing your values and doing the work so that you can really stand in alignment with your values, soften those limiting beliefs so that you can stand in alignment, what you say you value. Really important work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, are there specific techniques? I know a lot of it's nervous system work, so it's probably mindfulness and somatic work and stuff like that. Are there specific things that kind of across the board you feel like most people will benefit from in terms of preventing? Well, once you've recognized the burnout, managing that and, making it better and then preventing it from happening again.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm really big on the somatic approach to managing some of our stress. I think there is an order of operations that is going to help you be more effective at choosing the coping skills that are going to be the most effective for you in the moment. So, being able to learn to identify and map the states of your nervous system and where you're at in terms of your dysregulation is going to help you to pick a skill or resource, right? Because if you're, up here in fight or flight and you're trying to apply mindfulness first, you may not feel very effective at that. And that's the thing that I see a lot of times with the therapists that I work with is they're so self-aware. They know the coping skills. They're like, why isn't this working for me? Right? Like, I know this is a valuable skill and a resource, but it's not working for me. And so, what I help them understand is that sometimes the order of operations is off. We might have a need to get that energy out of our body first before we can drop in and practice some mindfulness, or we need to get out of that survival mode first before we can be with ourselves and our big feelings. Right. And so, just teaching them how to sense into where they're at in their dysregulation so that then they can pick the most practical effective tool in that moment is really where I've seen it be like the most biggest shifts for the people that I work with. So I would say again from a somatic perspective it's being able to know your nervous system, but then it's also being able to have like this big robust toolbox of okay, so now that I know where I'm at and what I need, which tool do I want to use in this moment? And so I'm again really big on the practical somatic things like, if your body wants to fight, we got to move those arms and legs. If your body wants to freeze, then we got to, sit with that and nurture it. That I think has been the biggest game changing awarenesses and insights that I've been able to offer to my clients.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, so all of this, both ultimately people are going to say, well, this is self care. But that has become so generalized and so like it's not even a term I want to use with clients anymore, but truly looking at not only what are my needs, but how can I best meet those needs? And your description, it's like, so you have this massive wound and you're going to put a Band-Aid on it instead of going to the hospital to get stitches.
Absolutely. It's like having a broken bone and thinking Tylenol is going to do the job. It's like, well, it's going to help some, but you need to go deal with the broken bone, right? Like there's something bigger happening there. And the Tylenol will help treat the symptom of the pain, but it's not going to alleviate or correct the bone. Right. And so really getting clear on like, okay, where is the wound that it needs to be treated? I'm seeing the smoke up here, but where's the fire?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in addition to your contribution at Therabundle, are there other resources that you recommend for people clinicians for their clients want to learn more about this?
Yeah, I have a free burnout clarity checklist. So if folks are like, I think maybe there's some smoke, but I'm not entirely sure if it's like full on burnout. I have a free burnout clarity checklist where they can just self assess if this is something that they're running into. And that provides them like some next steps as what they can do if they are. So I definitely recommend doing something like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, just really recognizing those things. And sometimes it needs to be really like spelled out for you, like really spelled out for you. And then the other thing is, I think a lot of us fall into the trap of, and you talked about this earlier on. Okay, so I've recovered from the burnout. I'm okay now, and we don't make any changes. And then that can lead to a shame cycle because we realize I'm back in burnout. And for sure, I know we both want the message to be, if you're a clinician out there dealing with burnout, please reach out to colleagues. Please reach out for resources. Like, this is nothing to be ashamed of. but you can learn and do better next time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's definitely, again, we want to get connected with others because that's going to help to shine light on what we're experiencing. It's going to help normalize and validate. And in my researching with, therapists who are struggling with burnout, it was like 10 out of 10 times, like every single clinician I spoke to shared with me some version of having shame around saying I'm burnt out. Because either there was supervisors they were ashamed of, embarrassed, that they would find out. They didn't want their colleagues to think that their work was not going to be good work. Like they were worried that it was going to limit the referrals that they got from their colleagues if they named that. And so I just really want to say, like, please ask each other too. Like have a sense of each other and ask the hard question, like, how are you really doing? And really providing the space for one another to be honest about your experiences, because we have to support each other with this work. It's really heavy work and it's really important work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And therapists, we set the bar so high for ourselves. We just feel like we have to be at 100% every time and we have to show up no matter what, even if we're sick. We just don't make these decisions for ourselves. It's all about the client. And we are humans who happen to be therapists. And so, yes, the considerations for the client are very important, but the considerations for ourselves is also very important.
So important. Yep. 100%.
Okay. So can you tell me if you have a favorite catchphrase or analogy you like to use with clients?
Yeah. So actually, it kind of goes along with what we're talking about right now, which is that it's hard to read the label when you're in the jar. And so again, I think yeah, it speaks to how you can be so aware of yourself and others, and you can see others so accurately, and you can be so wonderful and supportive and brilliant at what you do. And yet we can still have this level of just not being able to fully see. And so that's where, again, my suggestion is like, ask each other, how are you doing? Like, I'm seeing some things from my side of the jar. How does it feel for you in the jar, right? And really just offering each other that permission to acknowledge, oh, I think I am feeling a little something, right? Because it's really hard to read the label when you're in the jar.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. I have never heard that one before. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Monica. I will put links in the show notes so they can find you and get your free resource. There'll also be a link in the show notes for TheraBundle, which is not on sale yet. We are in the Thera Summit phase right now, where there's lots of free trainings that are going to be offered soon. So I'll get all that information and share it with the listeners so they can find you. And for all you hardworking therapists out there, please remember our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely.